if you work for yourself, which goodness knows I've done most of my life, one way to look at it is the customer is always right. Therefore, you are always at the beck and call of anyone who needs or wants your assistance. Another way to look at it is you're the boss, right? You are your own boss. And it's up to you to say, okay, I will do this on this day. I won't do this on that day. If you don't get the materials to me by X date, then they won't get filed by the deadline they're supposed to be filed.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a good one. Our guest is the author of Career Self-Care and writes the highly popular Laid Back Leader column for Inc.com. Her articles and workshops offer research-backed advice to help ambitious people get the most out of their careers and their lives. Minda Zetlin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you, and what a great topic to be talking about. Self-care for our listeners, I'd say, is probably pretty high up on the list. Take care of yourself first, and lots of good things can happen next. But before we get into all of that, Minda, please tell us about you and your career journey leading up to this point.
Sure. Well, I started writing for Inc., more than a decade ago. And I began as, with a lot of publications, things went online. I began writing this column, and I was writing quite a lot of columns, pretty much one every day. So I covered a whole lot of different topics. And what I discovered was that as I wrote about this topic of how to be more effective, but also more mindful and happier at work, our readers were really interested in that because, the nice thing about writing online is that you can see what people are clicking on pretty quickly. So you can tell what people are interested on pretty quickly. So as I got more and more towards writing about this topic, I got more and more interested in it myself because, a lot of this applied to me. I'm a self-employed solopreneur person who often would work till very late at night and through weekends and such like. And the more I was doing this research, the more I was seeing that really wasn't a very good idea. And one Christmas, I had been working 7 days a week, and my husband was complaining that he never got to talk to me. And I read about a copywriter in Indonesia who literally worked herself to death, tweeting 30 hours of work and still going strong right before she died. And it was a bit of a wake-up call. And I wrote this confessional column about why you have to stop working so hard, and it just went viral. And I realized that this is something that people need to hear. Not just you have to stop working so hard, but how to combine life and work and have a career that you love and a life that you like and not make yourself miserable along the way. And people do seem to need it.
Wow. I absolutely love that. And it is so needed. I know our listeners are exactly like that. And in fact, I would say I've got that myself. So often it starts innocently, I think. If I love what I do, I know many of our listeners love what they do. So it starts off seeming like, oh, I'm doing what I love. But then eventually that can expand. And for me anyways, it can expand. And it's like, whoa, wait a second. I'm like spending a lot of time thinking about, and it's not only at the desk and in front of the computer, but it's happening like my thoughts when I'm with my family. I'm thinking about work, or work is affecting my presence with other areas of my life. And I can see how it's not healthy.
No, and it's not. The funny thing is, it may not be good for your family life or your health A lot of people kind of recognize that. What people don't recognize as easily is that it also isn't the best thing for your career, because in so many ways, it's really essential to have that ability to step away from work and ability to limit work taking over your life. I think it's perfectly fine if you're out on a hike or something, and as you're walking along, or sitting in your fishing boat or whatever, you find yourself thinking about a problem that you have at work, or the next big thing that you would like to do in your career. That's fine. That's where we have these kind of creative thoughts. But it is really important to be where you are, to keep the relationships in your life as vital as both your work relationships and your work itself. And the thing is that people who are able to do that don't limit their careers as they, I think, sometimes are afraid. Often enhancing the other parts of your life and making that time for yourself and that time to focus in your relationships and your health and your energy level, because so many of us get so tired doing this, working as hard as we do. All of that actually feeds into your career and makes it better. So after I had that little epiphany that I talked about at the beginning, I made a line in the sand that there would be one day a week that I would do no work at all. And I can't claim any genius there. I had interviewed an expert who had explained to me in detail why it was really important to do that. So I had put it in my column. So I figured I had better follow my own advice. And I suppose I didn't get quite as many things done, but the things that I got done, I did a lot better. And the effect on my career was anything but bad. It's the more I've made the time to cut out time for me, time for getting outside, time for vacation and all that stuff, actually the better my career has gone. And I don't think that's an accident.
So tell me again now, this is a day off a week. Is this outside of the weekend, or explain that a bit more?
Ideally, it should be over the weekend, just because that's when everyone is off. I don't know about you, and
I was getting
about,
excited. I'm like, yeah, let's take a day off during the
no,
week where I actually get some time for myself.
I think it's actually great to take a day off during the week, and I do that from time to time as well. Often because there's something going on, like I took a Wednesday off recently to go take a little hike into the woods and soak in a hot spring. That's one of the nice things about being here in the Pacific Northwest. But one way or another, I don't know about your listeners, but I think when you're self-employed and you work at home, it's extremely easy and extremely tempting to just pick up a little bit of work on the weekend, spend a couple of hours on Saturday finishing off whatever you didn't finish during the week, spend a couple hours on Sunday getting the jump on the coming week. And while a certain amount of that may be fine, what happens is that you don't have a whole 24-hour period when you're not working. And I think that that's really important just for our brains and our emotional state, and also our ability to see our work objectively. There's so much that you can't really see when you're in it, in the day-to-day of whatever you have to do, that you don't really get the big picture, and you don't do a good job of figuring out what's important, what's actually important, and what just seems like it's important in the moment. So it's really important to take that step back from work. In an ideal world, now I will say that I myself have never achieved this, and I never could achieve this. So this is definitely a case of do what I say, not what I do. But in an ideal world, you would even have one day a week where you didn't look at your email. I know, very hard to do.
Very hard to do. It is one of these things with the phone. We're so connected to
Yes.
things. So,
Yep.
like, I can't even imagine what it would be like to live back in the day when I was young, where there was no fax machines. There was just literally the only way to communicate was by letter or by driving up to some place or a telephone. That was it. And now we have, and I always have my phone in my pocket, and it can be detrimental, I think, to our focus by not taking good care of that.
Yes. There's a fun game that people play sometimes called phone stacking. Do you know about this? where
I don't.
you go out to dinner with a bunch of friends, and you have to put all your phones in a pile on the table, and whoever picks up their phone first also has to pick up the check.
Oh, I like that. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love that. That is such an interesting concept, and I think bringing some game around it is a healthy way to think about it, because even my kids are often saying, "Dad, stop," because my wife will say, "Stop looking at your phone," and now my kids are saying it, but it's the truth. It is, they're noticing it, and it starts innocently, like everything. It's like, dealing with things in a business. There's things that are going on, so sometimes we need to deal with things that are maybe urgent. However, that slips into, and I think can slip into, where, okay, really, is that urgent? Do I really need to be looking at my phone right now? Or is this an addiction? Is this something that's just a way to distract myself? That's often, I'm aware that that's probably what it is more often than it is I'm actually dealing with something that needs to be dealt with.
You're right. And the thing is, of course, as with everything in business and in life, it's not really either or. There could be something urgent. There could be something that feels urgent. And if you took 5 minutes to think about it, you would think, okay, if I answer this tomorrow morning, would it really make a material difference to anything? And the answer might be no. On that subject, I just came across something really brilliant that Adam Grant suggested, the Wharton psychologist. Some of you may know who he is. Really simple thing that we all could be doing and should be doing, that I'm probably going to write about soon. So here's a little preview to one of my upcoming columns. Most of us, when we send an email, most of the time we don't necessarily expect an immediate response. Or, we expect a response maybe within 24 hours, depending on the topic of the email, maybe not even that. But when we get an email, often we feel like, for the person to know that we really care about their priorities and their work, we must respond immediately. And so we drop everything, whatever we're in the middle of, and answer this apparently urgent email. If we all kind of included into our emails maybe a sentence saying, I would really like to hear back from you by Tuesday, or this is really urgent, could you please respond as soon as you can? If we set the expectations, then the people receiving the email could go, oh, okay, this isn't something I have to drop everything for. Let me go back to what I'm doing and I'll answer it, later on or tomorrow. That one small thing would make us all a lot more sane. And I think it's a great idea.
I really like that idea. It's just giving people clear instructions of what you need.
Yeah.
This is no, not urgent, or I really need this by Friday. Something so simple to let them know. Not everybody will comply with that, but it's taking that extra step to be clear in the communication.
Yep.
Very cool. Jumping back to the day off, like when you said, and I'm going to take a full day off every week, not do any work. What did you have challenges getting there? Was it easy to do?
No. None of this stuff is easy to do, really, because me, like probably a lot of your listeners, I feel that if I'm not working all the time, then I'm not necessarily doing a good job, or I'm not doing as good a job as I could be, or I'm not doing as good a job as somebody else might be, instead of me. And that could be bad. So you have to get past this fear of dropping the ball, or fear of not giving, the 110% that everybody expects, right? Can you actually give 110%? 110% of the time? No, you can't. So clearly we all go through periods, every year, every quarter or whatever, where you do have a crunch time and you do have to meet a deadline or something. And in those periods, yes, sometimes some of these rules get broken. But if I do that, I usually try to follow it up with, a day off to go sit in the hot spring or something. I think it's really important to have that balance. And it's really important to figure out that, the world won't come to an end. I had this super interesting, not fun, but super interesting experience a few years ago when I was in the middle of a whole lot of things and a whole lot of work and family stuff too. And my husband and I both got sick, and he came down with bronchitis, but because I was working harder and getting less rest or whatever, in my case, it went on to become pneumonia. And I had all these deadlines, and I was supposed to be interviewing big CIOs, actually. That was the job that I was doing at that point. And so I had to send out emails both to my editor and to all these rather important executives saying, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to reschedule this for a while from now because I'm really sick. And I was amazed at how these things that appear to be immovable deadlines, even in publishing, where you think that deadlines really would be immovable, really weren't so immovable. And people could come back and say, okay, we'll do this in 2 weeks instead of today. And it was really fine. Often it's really more fine to take care of yourself and to push things back than you think it is.
I absolutely agree. I think the stewing over it causes way more damage than just taking the action and facing the reality of what it needs to be. It's like, you were sick. What are you going to do?
Right.
And to take it away from the being really sick, it doesn't have to get to that level either. It can be, I don't know that I can make this deadline without overrunning myself, and then being real with ourselves to say that this is what it is. It needs to be remanaged and repromised, and communicate to people to get that done, versus stewing about it, worrying about it, and driving ourselves into the ground.
Right. And it shouldn't get to that point, obviously. There were a lot of other things that got screwed up in my personal life because I got sick, that it just wasn't a good idea, obviously. So the thing is, at the same time, we want to do a good job. We want to keep our commitments, especially as one-person entrepreneur. If you say you're going to do something, you do need to, not, if you don't come down with pneumonia, you do need to get it done. So the trick is to figure out what you can cut out and what things really deserve your full attention. And that's the challenge we spend our whole lives figuring out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With our listener, they are constantly, like, it never ends, right? It's I think that's a good part of this industry, is the finances roll on. There's always going to be work to do. The government wants to know, taxes need to be paid. We need to know if we're making money or not making money. And every single day there's more work to be done, which can be overwhelming if there's not a system in place and you don't have things figured out, or get behind. But what I found over the years, speaking to our listeners, is that they really take these things, many of them, not all, take it very personally. And many times they're actually subsidizing their clients' lack of getting documents, or being on time with things. They take it on themselves. It's like their fault because they're behind, or that they couldn't complete something because their client didn't get something to them in time. They reminded them and all this. Because even though we know, it's like, well, your client is the one that is putting you behind, they'll often put that on themselves. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to keep up to date and be on time and get things to their clients on time, where all these other factors that can have it not go that way, and yet they put it all on themselves. What would you say about some mechanisms or strategies to deal with or treat that differently?
Wow. Well, that's an interesting challenge. So I think we're really talking about two different things here. One is how you communicate with your clients, and the other is how you communicate with yourself. So I'm going to assume that the communication with the clients is very clear, and at some reasonable point, you let them know multiple times, if you don't provide me this document or this information by X date, the consequences are going to be Y. So your communication is clear, and it's ahead of time, and it's in whatever form is most effective for that particular client, because different people respond differently to different types of communication. Some people need email, other people, you have to use SMS or something. So assuming that you've got all that down, which I'm going to guess your audience members probably do, the second part is really difficult. We want to do a really good job. we want the people we work for to recommend us to other people. And for that to happen, we know that there need to be good outcomes. And yet, for reasons completely outside your control, the outcome might not be good. So it's important to really take note of what you can control and what you can't control. And I talk about this a lot in my book and in workshops when it comes to things like goal setting and trying to achieve what you want to achieve. You have to be really clear on what it's within your power to do. So you set yourself the goal to say, okay, I'm going to remind every one of my clients 3 times this week that they have to file whatever it is by this deadline. Then if you do that, you've met your goal and you can pat yourself on the back. You can literally pat yourself on the back. I do that every once in a while when I want to remind myself that I've done something right. And then if the result isn't what you want it to be, that's hard and it's really frustrating, but it's not something that you did and it's not something that was in your control. So you need to figure out where you can be proud of yourself and know that you did a good job, whatever the consequences are afterward.
Yeah, I love that. And then on the first one around communications, I think that is an area where it's some do it. I think there is a big opportunity for putting in automations. A lot of the guests that we've had on is to increase that clarity and to really make, it might be like, just like you said around the email. It's like, we need to get these documents, but did you put in that you need them by a certain date? It's looking at that clarity. I think with your suggestion of sending an email and saying, I need this by this date, is going to make it better for the receiver to know this has to get done right away. So it's looking at the clarity, I guess, of those emails to making sure that they know that there's something has to happen by this date and what are the consequences if it doesn't happen, and doing that in a clear and concise way. And then, yes, like you said, this is a big issue with our listeners. They care very deeply about the work they do and their clients, and that can have a sharp edge to the other side, which is that they can over care about these things and take it on themselves, which is detrimental to themselves. What about workplaces? You talk a lot about self-care. How do people self-care inside their business? And we have many listeners that, they might be small businesses, but they work and deal with other workplaces, which can be challenging as well. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, workplaces can be very problematic. Obviously, in the last couple of years, our idea of what the workplace is has kind of exploded and been put back together in some form. So, what a workplace was 3 years ago and what a workplace is now, I think, is not the same. Workplaces, and I think this might be particularly true if you're coming in as an independent contractor, but you're inside someone else's workplace, are not set up to recognize that the people in them are human beings. And that's kind of a problem everywhere. I think it's gotten a little bit better. I think the pandemic sort of helped with some of that because all of a sudden we were all looking into each other's homes. And even though people would put in backgrounds or try to arrange things behind them to make it look, to project whatever image they wanted, we suddenly sort of became aware of all of each other as, people with families and cats and dogs and babies and all the other stuff that you might have in your home. So I think it's great to bring some of that to the degree that you can into the workplaces. A feature that Inc. used to do regularly is it used to rank the most dog-friendly workplaces in America and show pictures of them. I'm a cat person, so but my home office is definitely a cat-friendly workplace. There's all kinds of things like that you can come into the office and be, within reason, the human being that you are. Now I say within reason because everybody needs to feel comfortable in the workplace, whatever their gender, sexual orientation, politics, ethnic background, and so forth. So if who you are is someone who isn't accepting of other people in that way, then you do have to adjust that. But
have to leave that at home.
Right. That needs to stay home. But but I do think we do, we talk about bringing our full selves to work. And I think as the line between at work and not at work is getting increasingly blurry because of things like
It
smartphones
really
and
is. It
work from
really is.
home and,
Yeah.
Zoom and everything. The more I think we need to try and accommodate the fact that people are human. But if they're in the workplace, they're still human. If they're home, they're still human, and they're human first and they're working second.
That's right. I mean, it is. You got me laughing because I haven't really stopped and paused and thought about how different, and I think that's a polite way of saying it is, than just in the last 2 years with just, it's not just work, but it's also relationships with people and how we communicate and the work that we do. And everyone's different, right? There's some people that did not go through that. They kept working in the workplace and everything went on healthcare, right? They would have different experience of all of it because they had to keep going and being around people and all that good stuff. But it really is interesting how we're all dealing with it now and what it will look like, because we've put this so much more digital emphasis on our lives. And it's kind of like in science fiction, it's like a cyborg, right? We're humans, but yet they're not connected to us, but they are pretty close. Our fingers are on them all day. And that has an interesting effect, right? So we're having these relationships with people on Zoom, we're seeing their lives, and it's like way more information coming at us. Has an effect. I don't think we all have figured out or see how that effect or what it's going to look like in the end. I think we're going in some really cool directions, but there's a lot of downsides to it as well.
There are. And I think this whole question of how much people are working in the workplace and how much people are working remotely, and whether they're working 4 days a week or 5, or all of those questions are very much in flux right now. And there's a lot of shakeout, I guess, that I think is going to happen over the next couple of years, assuming that we don't have another big wave of the pandemic or another pandemic to drive us all home again. It's interesting, and this is completely a tangential, but it's interesting to remember. I'm sorry, I don't know in Canada, but in the United States, we tend to kind of think, oh, everybody worked from home. And in fact, only half the working population, even at the worst of the pandemic, was working away from the workplace. We forget that the vast majority of people out there actually physically need to be, or maybe not the vast majority, but a very, very large segment of the working population actually needs to be at a specific place to do their work at all, a warehouse, a store, as you say, healthcare. So I think it's, we who work on, as you say, touching computers or whatever all day long, need to remember that we're not everybody, even though
That's
it
right.
can feel that way. So having said that, what was really interesting, I had an interesting realization in the course of the pandemic, which is that 7 years ago, my husband and I moved from upstate New York, where I had lived for many, many years and he had lived his entire life, and came to north of Seattle, which is, as one of my cousins pointed out, as far as we could have moved and still remained in the continental United States. And all our family, therefore, is in New York. And at big birthdays and Christmas times and such, we started having these Zoom gatherings with our family members after and during the pandemic. Now, we could have done that from the beginning. The technology was there. It just didn't occur to any of us to do it until suddenly the pandemic forced us to think about ways of interacting that are different. So, I think it's interesting. I think it's gotten us thinking differently about how we interact with people. My particular situation at the moment is that my husband, who's a musician, is doing a 2-month residency in France. And so we've been apart longer than any time since we met, but we spend, 60 to 90 minutes on Zoom every day.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Amazing. And speaking of the similar experience with family get-togethers on Zoom, there was a lot of people. Between my wife and I, we have family members all over the world, and had never met some of these people ever. And so having them on a Zoom is like, that wouldn't have likely ever happened. We would have never met or been able to communicate or update. It's not being in person, but it's better than nothing too.
It's better
So
than nothing, and it's better than a phone call, I think. I know not
that's
everyone
right.
agrees.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it depends on the whole telephone versus Zoom is an interesting one for me because I grew up on telephone, and so the way I behave, the way I talk, the way I think, I'm visual, and so you'd think Zoom would be better, but it's actually I'm like connecting my thoughts on the phone differently than when I'm connecting my thoughts when I'm looking at and trying to pay attention to somebody else on there. So for me, it's like been this interesting experience of it, but by far, like to have a family gathering on a telephone, it would be kind of
Right.
difficult. It's like who's talking? Like it wouldn't connect the voice with the face and all that. And so Zoom was really, really powerful that way to bring people together. And there's no doubt that that has been happening for a long time. And I think the pandemic just accelerated that and accelerated the way that we work online and how well we're doing there. I think the big takeaway for me is the need to be present to how much I need to. And I know our listener right now, I'm almost certain I can say that our listener needs to as well, is unplug for longer periods of time than we probably are right now, and to completely unplug from it because it's kind of gone over to that always on button. Weekends for myself, I have clients and working partners and colleagues in like all around the world, and it almost covers the entire world. So like I could literally have a conversation 24 hours a day in the industry of the North America, whether you're on the West Coast, Pacific, if you have clients in Hawaii, same thing, right? Or even if you have international clients, and it's a slippery slope. So my big takeaway from you is that taking that real time, unplugging and not engaging in digital, like just be in the present moment and taking care of myself, which will be healthy for me going forward.
Right. And probably healthy, I don't know about you personally, but in general, probably healthy for your career. And the thing is, I mean, it's really easy to forget this. If you work for yourself, which goodness knows I've done most of my life, one way to look at it is the customer is always right. Therefore, you are always at the beck and call of anyone who needs or wants your assistance. Another way to look at it is you're the boss, right? You are your own boss. And it's up to you to say, okay, I will do this on this day. I won't do this on that day. If you don't get the materials to me by X date, then they won't get filed by the deadline they're supposed to be filed. And it's okay if that deadline that you create includes enough space in it for you to be able to do your work properly and get a good night's sleep and have dinner with your family, right? It doesn't have to be, 5 minutes before the deadline that it's due is when I need to have it. You're your own boss, and that means you can set the rules about when you'll do what and when you won't.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think that is taking control and designing it to work for us. That's just having a conversation this morning with one of our clients and how she had come up with a new way to remind people in advance of something that she needed, and she had it automated. And it was, for her, it was just magical because it took it out of her having to use her brain power to even do that. It's like this automatically goes out, tells them when I need it. Get if they do as it's requested, and they get lots of reminders, gives her the space and time to get it done. That's a well-designed system that has her set up to win. And crazy enough, it has her clients set up to win because when they do what she requests, they get what they need. They don't pay penalties. They have what they need when they need it, and everybody's happy. So that's her taking care of herself by building systems and process and having tools in her business that help her be able to get to that point.
And I love that too, because it's you think, it takes 60 seconds to write an email saying, hey, I need this document, but it takes up brain space that you have to do that, and you have to remind yourself to do that, and then you have to remind them. And all those little details crowd into your brain and pull you away from, what we were talking about before, where you really need to focus your attention and what's really important. So the more you can, I agree, the more you can take that stuff out of your own brain, off your own plate, to use a cliche, and have it be automated, have it just happen, that is really valuable.
So true. So true. It's and many won't know. It's like I use the example of going for a massage. It's when I go to the massage, I think I'm pretty good. When I go to the massage, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize how tense I was, because we don't realize how much it's like the fish in water, right? Like you don't really know you're in it, but when you take it off, it's like, wow, the space it creates in our minds and what that effect of that is on our work is remarkable. Before I let you go, I'd love for you to tell us more about your book, and as well, you've got a lot of articles and content out there. I'd love for our listeners to know how they can learn more about you and get access to some of the things you're working on.
Sure. So you can certainly always go to my website, mindazetlin.com. The book is called Career Self-Care. It's available, pretty much anywhere that you might buy a book. It's full of a lot of the stuff that we talked about and a lot more. It's got lots of exercises in it to help you get more centered and more mindful, both in your life and your work. It took me a long time to write it, because it's really what I wish I had known 30 years ago. And I hope it's as helpful as it could possibly be.
Oh, it sounds like a wonderful book, a very important book. And just hearing you in this last little bit, it's you're writing from your own experience, and that is the very best. So I look forward to our listeners getting a copy of that. And I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners for you coming on and generously sharing what you know in this area.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Beautiful. And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.